Okay, welcome to Movie Talk episode 006. As always, uh, your hosts, Aaron Croft and Nathan Croft. Good morning. No, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Nathan. We have with us as special guests today, um, based on the movie that we're reviewing, we brought in some subject matter experts, Joshua and Michael Croft. And they are going to offer color commentary as well as their opinions about the movie. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the movie Dungeons and Dragons. It's been out since March of last year. However, Michael, who is on mission in Austin, Texas, didn't get to see it. I saw it until recently. Yeah, and so I've seen it probably 3 or 4 times now, which is telling because I don't watch movies more than once unless
the movie has to be truly good.
Yeah, go back. I did watch it. For me to watch it in the first place, then it's really good. So, remind me, what was the Rotten Tomatoes score on this thing?
91%.
91% by critics, and audience score was 93%, which is pretty good. Anything above 90 from a critic's perspective, especially if it's a mainstream movie, like it's not one of those art house, you know what I mean, movies that get scores high and it like plays in 3 theaters and 60 people have seen it total, right?
Yeah.
This is a mainstream blockbuster type movie, and for it to score as highly as it did, I don't think anybody was expecting a Dungeons and Dragons. Honestly, I didn't know what you.
I think part of it is more about how the culture surrounding it changed, because 2020 happened, right? And
like in terms of
pandemic, people had to figure out ways to get together with your friends without having to actually go to each other's houses. Even you have done that, where
it's true.
Video conferencing, but playing that game was a good way to get people into it, and also I think raised awareness for it a lot in terms of like popularity and everything. More so maybe than maybe it has been. That's also been popularized by Stranger Things, also being a key element of that. And so it's grown more in popularity. More people.
Oh, you mean like in Stranger Things they were playing Dungeons and
Yeah,
Dragons?
and they still
Okay,
like it's still kind of a key element where they get some of their like even most of the monster names. Like Demogorgon and Vecna are both monsters from Dungeons and Dragons,
as well as the Mind Flayer.
Mind Flayer as well, yeah. Huh. So it's grown more in popularity, and I think Hasbro, who owns we could try again. We could do this again.
Well, what had been done in the past? Like
there
was a knockoff called Mazes and Monsters with Tom Hanks. I know back in the 80s or 90s. I think it was one of those very early shows.
That was actually based off of a real event that did happen, I think.
Where actually Mazes and Monsters.
Well, no, because isn't that movie about like a group of people who go down in like some sewers or something?
I don't know. I haven't seen it.
Oh, okay.
If I have seen it, I don't remember.
I think it's about some person who gets a little bit too obsessed with a game called Mazes and Monsters and ends up kind of creating a real life dungeon and puts his friends through it or something like that. I think that's what the movie's about. I'm not actually sure.
Yes, we'll have to
but that's an event that actually did happen back in the 80s and stuff. There was a college student, I believe, who went missing. He was believed to have went missing under the sewers under a college campus, and eventually they found him in like New York. But they suspected that it was due to his obsession. They called it an obsession with Dungeons and Dragons that he would play with his friends, and that's what kind of caused the satanic panic about Dungeons and Dragons, where everyone was like, "Oh, Dungeons and Dragons is satanic and evil."
It was very much people not understanding what the game was. People thought it's like, oh, they're practicing witchcraft, when in reality you're pretending to do those things that happen. It's role playing. But a lot of people are just like, oh, they're getting into witchcraft, when in reality it's just like roll for initiative, really. It's like, do this, you're here. And part of that also didn't help. There's a really good art book about the history of the art book for Dungeons and Dragons that talks about that, about how one of the very first, was it Dungeon Master Guides or one of the very first campaign books had this big statue of like a kind of a demon looking guy that people were fighting against. But that book cover did not help anything. People who went after.
So I was part of a very early. My oldest brother Troy, who's 5 years older than me, and I must have been less than 12 years old, but he got like he had those Dungeon Master books and stuff, and we played it a little bit as kids. I remember creating. My older brother helped me create the first character sheet I ever had. I still remember it. It was for an elf named Dor, D-O-R. Don't know why, but we campaigned with that, and it was kind of fun. I remember thinking it was kind of fun. Now we didn't go much further than that. We moved on to other things, but so it didn't. It wasn't a big part of my growing up, but I remember, and I remember Dungeons and Dragons in its infancy, right, in the early '80s. So, and then you guys played it a lot more than probably I ever did as a kid.
Your friend Brandon,
His uncle bought him a starter
you,
set.
bought you and your friends a starter set for him to play.
Oh,
He
that's
called
right.
us up and was like, "Hey, come play with me." And that started a long chain reaction.
Almost pretty much every single one of you getting into it.
It's true. For the better part of a decade, we've been pretty into it.
Well, and it's also like in other forms of media, you have people doing like Matthew Mercer does Critical Role, created this whole podcast.
Yeah, one of the most
the
most popular D&D podcasts.
It's really just him and his other fellow voice actors who have made characters and are doing like campaigns and stuff. They've actually since turned that campaign that they played into a TV show.
It's an Amazon original TV show. The first campaign they did, I think that's 3 now.
Yeah.
They've grown. So each with like over 100 episodes that are all like 3 hours long.
Of what?
So essentially the voice actor Matthew Mercer and a bunch of other voice actors, they played D&D together, and they eventually, through a company called Geek and Sundry, made it into a podcast that got wildly popular.
Just because the voice actors have really good improvisation skills.
Yeah.
So it's very entertaining to watch because they can voice the characters that they're playing as and coming up with a story kind of on the fly. But the story was good enough that Critical Role helped make an animated TV show about the first campaign.
So there was the cartoon.
The very old early
80s
cartoon.
Yeah, and I watched it. Right, it was cool. I even talked to your mother, and she even watched that, which was telling me because they didn't watch anything.
That's true.
But they actually, I asked her if she watched Saturday morning cartoons, and she did watch that show specifically.
Well, and what's funny about the movie is that those characters are in there.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Yeah, they make a cameo.
They have
as live action people, which is kind of fun. That's kind of fun that they threw that back there.
Is like a cultural touchstone. Like this is something like a little bit of an Easter egg of what we used to be.
Yeah.
Out from where we were to how we were.
So this movie comes out. It does really well, and then word of mouth. I think it I don't know what the gross take was, but probably well enough.
It did well enough that I think Paramount realized that there was stuff to be done. The point where they're also like greenlit a Dungeons and Dragons TV show. Now, unfortunately, like the live action
TV show, they're
like,
gonna do it
like a live action TV show, separate characters, mind you, like unrelated to what happened in this movie. But that's since been canceled at Paramount, but they're shopping it around to other studios. So we're gonna have to see if that.
Well, there's an appetite for fantasy type stuff, which Game of Thrones proved out, right? People.
Oh, absolutely.
People want that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Same thing like the Witcher show and stuff.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It was a video game show, but still.
It's still very much in that fantasy genre.
All right, so this comes out and
Comes out in March of 2020.
Yep, and I think a lot of people go see it. I think it's. Do you know what the take on it was?
So I think it was like it made its money back, but it wasn't like amazing. Like,
Well, it wasn't like.
it wasn't like a giant
wasn't
box
Avengers
office
Endgame.
hit. People knew it was good, and people went to go see it. But also, I think part of it was that, like, Dungeons and Dragons, regardless of how popular it is still like, what is this? How much do you need to know about it before going into it?
Well, and I think it did well enough. I'm certain of it.
I'm certain there hasn't been, as far as I know, there hasn't been any news. I know
There's no announcements. I just read about it. But,
Everybody involved would love to come back and do it.
yep. Which
There's
is
actually-
also tough.
There was also a funny post I saw that Chris Pine says Dungeons and Dragons will definitely happen again as soon as everybody's schedules line up,
Yeah.
which is in reference to
classic Dungeons and Dragons problem where you can't get the entire group together because everyone has schedule conflicts.
Yeah.
It's the worst. It's terrible.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you guys as like, so this movie, this is why I think one of the reasons it worked. Whether you knew nothing about it or whether you were like heavy into the Dungeons and Dragons lore, I think it worked for either one of those audiences.
And yeah, it really did. It really did. Even though like there were some like because I'm not as deep into it as you guys did. I went and saw it actually on my way. I was being deployed. I was actually driving out to South Carolina. I saw it
You watched it while you were driving.
while I was driving. No, well, I went and saw it with one of the buddies from my unit just while we were traveling. Just because he had nothing to do, I had nothing to do. It had just come out like a couple of days ago. So I was like, hey, do you want to go see this? Like, it'd be pretty cool to go see. And so we watched it, and at that time, like I watched it, like, oh, that was pretty good. I recently rewatched it again. I'm like, oh, like this is actually much better than I think my first impression of it was.
Yeah.
Like I was actually surprised at how much I enjoyed it a second time.
Yeah. I watched it 3 or 4 times now, including just recently with Michael, and still liked it. And Mom sat through it and watched it as well, which is again telling for her that she can be. But did you guys were you satisfied knowing all that you know about Dungeons and Dragons? And Joshua, you're kind of a purist. Did it like offend your Dungeons and Dragons sensibilities? I just mean like you like
Somebody who actively is playing.
no, I mean like when I want to go off and create my weird characters, you're like, Dad, let's get real. You know what I mean?
Just because I won't let you make Captain America doesn't mean I'm a purist.
As someone who appreciates it, do you?
Yeah, I did like it.
It didn't like because like for example, what I'm saying is like as a Star Wars guy, when they started going off the rails on stuff and offending me, like yeah, I like didn't like some of the stuff they did in the sequel trilogy, right? I don't think that happened with you guys. They paid homage to all like cool parts. They didn't like I don't know.
There's nothing in there that's like, why would you tell it this way? Like sometimes like in films they make creative choices that for some reason or other just do not make sense, like in terms of like how fans would have seen it. And one of those things that at least recently that I've seen is that they have the Legend of Zelda movie. They announced it. The first hint that something was off was that Nintendo didn't make a big deal about it. Shigeru Miyamoto, creator of Mario and everything, just tweeted out the news, right? He just tweeted out the news. They didn't have a Nintendo Direct. Oh, they said it was going to be live action, which is also people are like, I don't know, like Legend of Zelda, like however animated it is, has always been a video game that has had more like fantastical elements that are a lot harder to translate into live action than anything else. And 3, you have a producer who has a very mixed bag of projects. So, and so it's stuff like that where it's like, why would you make these decisions? But there weren't any like decisions like creatively that seemed to like
They didn't go against the
Distract
rules of the universe.
It was
You know
interesting.
what I mean?
Yeah, like one thing that I did note that all the rules that they had in the game came into effect. Like I remember in like at the end fight scene when they're fighting, what was her name, Sophina?
Yeah.
The Lich. It was interesting because she cast the animate object spell on that dragon statue, and that's a concentration based spell in the rules of the book. And I thought it was interesting that you did see her continuing to keep up that concentration. How she wasn't casting any other spells at the time because she had to keep that concentration up to
especially
continue
when
with
they
animating
attacked
the
her
dragon.
and immediately turned back into stone.
Yeah. So I thought that was an interesting kind of like even they have like the rules of like spell casting stuff from the actual books still implemented into the movie.
So they sufficiently honored the game, right?
Yeah.
That's what you guys are saying. Without so it didn't like tick off anybody who has played it enough to really appreciate the game, right?
And it was also. Oh, sorry, you go first. Okay. I also thought it was really interesting that every single spell that they cast, you could kind of pick out exactly what spell it was.
Yeah.
So I thought that was also really interesting.
So like even like a guy like me, or like let's take Mom who doesn't know much about this, right? Like the chain lightning one or whatever that she cast at the beginning while they were at the Harper's Keep or whatever.
Yeah, so I think that was an interesting thing because, like, obviously
Those
so
are
the-
those are real. Everything they
those
did
are-
there were legitimate Dungeons and Dragons spells.
Yeah, like the chain lightning spell, you shoot a target and it jumps from target
Time
to
stop.
target. Time stop is a very it's an intense spell.
Is that a high level
That yeah,
person spell?
that's a 9th level spell, top level spellcaster.
Okay, so a little bit of background for our many viewers out there. More than 5, probably less than 10. But all right, so run us through the basic difference, Joshua, between a race and a class in Dungeons and Dragons.
A race is a species, a class is what you do.
What are some examples of races in Dungeons and Dragons?
Humans, elves, dwarves,
Orcs.
halflings.
Halflings. Okay, so we see all those. What else? There's other ones, and there could be mixed races as well, right?
Half elves, half orcs, dragonborns. That's also something I liked is how they had kind of a
What was Jarneth and the?
during
The bird.
he was an Aarakocra,
Oh, really?
which is a race of bird people from the Elder Plane of Air. We don't actually live for very long.
They don't live long.
Yeah, that's kind of
It's
interesting.
short
They
for
live less
lives.
than they live generally less than 50 years.
Let's see what else. And then classes of people. That's more or less. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of like their main job, what they're good at, right?
Kind of your profession, a little bit.
So
We have Chris Pine as the bard.
Chris Pine.
So what's interesting is I don't think they say any of their actual professions out loud other than like the wizard, right?
It's true.
They don't
Sorcerer.
ever call Chris Pine a bard. I don't think.
I think
He said he went to the
beginning,
bard's
He said he went to a
college.
bard college.
And it's more it's very much implied. Yeah, of course he's a bard because
They don't because
he
he's
plays-
charismatic.
He plays
and
the
he plays
lute.
the lute, all that
He plays
stuff,
the lute.
yeah.
Went to the bard's college.
They don't call Olga a barbarian, right?
They never do
Which
They never do.
which why do we assume that she's a barbarian?
because she's big, strong, angry, and wields a big axe.
And that's barbarian. Those are barbarian
Very,
traits.
very, very trademark.
So she comes from like some sort of barbarian clan or tribe or something like that that
Mhm.
outcast her when she gets together with Marlon and the Halfling, right?
Yeah.
Not hobbits. Hobbits don't exist in.
Well, I mean, Hobbit's just another word for habit. They just can't call them
You
hobbits.
can't
Well,
legally-
Hobbit-
you can't
Hobbit-
legally call them.
Hobbits are Lord of the Rings. That's
Yeah,
that's
it-
Tolkien
yeah,
stuff,
it's
right?
it's a copyright thing. Is why you can't call them hobbits.
Okay.
Because originally, back in like the old D&D, they did call them hobbits, but then they had copyright issues, so they had to change
Is
it.
that right? Okay. What other classes? So we have I don't remember his name. To me, he's my favorite character. He's the paladin.
Oh, I don't remember his name either.
So I can't remember
Zane?
what his name is.
Zane?
Is it Zank? That sounds right. We'll call him Zank for our purposes here. So Zank, he to me is a scene stealer. Like he was probably my favorite part of the movie. But he's a paladin, we assume, right?
Yeah,
Right.
he's definitely a paladin. because
Holy cow.
You see him when he goes and fights those assassin guys. He uses a divine smite, or at least some other paladin smite spell. I don't know if it would have been divine smite since it stayed on until he hit him, which is kind of trademark paladin spell, where a lot of the spells are like until you hit someone, this thing stays active.
What other class? So the wizarding kid,
I think he would have been a sorcerer.
he's a sorcerer as opposed to a wizard.
Mhm.
And tell me the difference between the two.
So
Joshua.
Joshua.
You look that up.
Sorcerers are born with magic.
Oh, okay. And he comes from a line of them, right? His grandfather and father.
Yeah.
whatever.
His grandfather, whatever, was a wizard.
Yeah. So I think that the main difference between a sorcerer and a wizard is a wizard has to learn their magic. A sorcerer is either born or through some accident gained magic powers that they then just use. Which I think for Simon's character specifically is his, I think, great grandfather was Elminster Omar, which is another famous D&D character from that particular world they're in. I even have like a little Magic the Gathering art card of him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, very, very famous character. But because of his great grandfather was such a powerful wizard and steeped in magic his whole life, that kind of got passed down to his descendants, kind of naturally, as opposed to having to learn his magic. It's magic that sort of he can just do.
All right. So tell me about tieflings. We have a tiefling. That's a race also, right?
She was a half tiefling, if I'm not mistaken.
She comes from, but she came from human parents,
Yeah, it's,
and then they rejected her, and that's why she's.
that's why she doesn't like humans. Yeah.
So how does that happen? I don't understand that.
So tieflings they're kind of an interesting thing. They can come from various different places. Tieflings are a half fiendish person. So they have some human traits and some fiendish traits, which grant some stuff like fire resistance and have some limited spell casting abilities. But I think there's not necessarily a specific consensus on where tieflings come from. Sometimes they come from, two tieflings naturally procreating, or from someone making an infernal pact with like a devil or something, and then their offspring then happens to have some sort of infernal.
But you're not necessarily bad. If
No,
you're a tiefling.
no. It's like specifically stated that that your infernal heritage has absolutely no effect on your personality.
So her race was tiefling, but her class was druid, right?
Druid, yeah.
She was a druid, which makes her a shapeshifter, and druids are in tune with nature. Is that correct?
Yeah, so druids have an ability called Wild Shape, which allows them to turn into any animal they've seen.
Is all that high level spell type stuff, all that stuff?
Actually, Wild Shape is a first level ability.
So she just turn into whatever.
But that's the only like part of the rules that I noticed was kind of inconsistent, because generally you can only Wild Shape for at least like 2 times during the day. Per long rest, you get like 2 counts up. And it goes up as you go higher in levels. And
so that scene, which is one of my favorites, when she's shape shifting but trying to get away, which is pretty great camera action and all sorts. So really cool. That probably wasn't. It's too much shape shifting without all the rest that you would need.
Yeah, and that's what in Dungeons and Dragons is oftentimes. So if you were looking at it as if it were from a game perspective, it would be called Rule of Cool, which is if your dungeon master.
As long as it's really
as long as it's cool, a lot of dungeon masters will be like, you know what, if it's cool, just do it. I'll allow you to do it.
And some people pointed out that in terms of like all these characters being there, you have to remember, take into consideration, if you were to see these characters as they were, but like as a piece of paper, right? You have to think about who would be playing them, right? And some people pointed out that the paladin is really only in the story as much as he needs to be, and tells them, hey, you probably better stop the red wizards. And then immediately, as soon as he helps them, he leaves. And some people realizing that's probably the dungeon master putting his character in there to guide them to a certain point, and then leaving as soon as he's
like,
done.
good that I could, but this is your quest, right?
Yeah, which is it's very
pretty much for everything.
Yeah, and some people have even pointed out that the story as a whole, all they want to do is get his daughter back. Like that's the main catalyst.
Then they have side quests, which I love, right? Because Dungeons and Dragons is all about side quests.
All about side quests.
Yep, and they have like several of them.
Yeah, and how like the paladin tells them you probably better stop the red wizards, and how they're so focused on their goal that the red wizard taking over the town is incidental. They're like, we probably better go help them out, even though the paladin was kind of pushing them down that path because they were so focused on this other path. Like that's what the players would do, is do what they wanted to, rather than what the story or the DM had planned for them. So,
well, what were let's go with what were your favorite parts of the movie to start with?
I think one of my favorite parts was how they had kind of some good representation from all these different, I guess in the books it calls them factions. So you have like the Harpers are a faction, and
can I stop you on that and tell you about Harpers? So Harpers are real. That's a real thing. I've never heard that until I saw it.
That's a real thing. So the Harpers are an organization of spellcasters and adventurers that kind of monitor the world and make sure there's no intense abuse of like magic or power. And they're kind of like like James Bond type stuff. Like they're going making sure there's no like secret organizations, or
they keep the world.
Yeah, they keep the world a better place. And then
so they have vows of poverty, or at least they don't take compensation for their efforts.
Yeah,
at least not much. That's why they're poor. Why he was poor.
Then you had like at the very beginning of the movie, it talks about the Lord's Alliance, which is essentially just a loose coalition of leadership in various cities, which was interesting that they had reference to that because it's that kind of council at the very beginning of the prison scene that they talk about the Lord's Alliance and how all these different people were from different cities, which are all actually cities and stuff. And then you had
The Red Wizards.
the Red Wizards, which we don't like the Red Wizards. First. Where does it suck? Anyway,
Speaking of
you have let's see,
Emerald Enclave.
you have the Emerald Enclave, which is essentially just orders of rangers and druids that protect nature and stuff and try to keep the balance between civilization and nature. And then the only two that I didn't see represented was the Order of the Gauntlet, which is like paladins and stuff, trying to uphold holy order and righteousness and stuff. And then the Zenitarium, which is a shadow network of mercenaries trying to extend its influence throughout the world. So I thought that they had good representation from aspects of the world rather than just like, oh, here's a story, here's a bunch of characters. It's like they really took the Forgotten Realms, which is where the world is, that they're playing is set, and they really kept with the canon with that world.
Well, and what's cool about this movie is that even the background characters are different places and people, right? Like you have the whole council, which is halfling, dragonborn, the
I
Aarakocra.
think it was a gnome actually.
I don't know. All I'm saying is it's very cool to see like so many references to things that like even the passing by with like the pumpkin cart, right? And see one of the pumpkins open its maw and lick its lips, knowing that oh, one of those is a mimic. But that's just incidental, right? It's just part of the world, right?
Yeah.
And there are so many things where it's like the little details make it so much more interesting because they've made it so fully part.
They threw in a lot of that the lay person isn't gonna, the average person like a mom notice that. Like I bet you guys would, right? And a lot of the like stuff in the maze, right? That at the end when they're fighting the stuff, like the ones that like the big great cat that's projecting
The Displacer Beast.
the gelatinous cube, which I actually recognize from anyway, lots of fun stuff like that. They threw in a lot of stuff like that to due diligence for paying off you guys that are good at the game, and then like, but still fun. You didn't know what those things were. It didn't make it less fun, right? But, yeah. Josh, what were your best parts of the movie?
I liked the sort of magic duel between Sophina and Simon. That was my favorite part.
Yeah, that was good.
They used Mage Hand.
At the end,
Actually, that wasn't Mage Hand. That was a spell called Bigby's Hand, which is essentially Mage Hand, but a lot bigger. You can fight.
oh,
Mage Hand is a cantrip just the size of a little hand. Bigby's Hand is a big hand.
and they tricked her. She made that actress that did that made a good creepy person. What other? We saw 2 movies with her in it. What was the other one that we just saw?
Not recently.
It was like right after that, and I said, "Oh, that's the lady from Dungeons and Dragons." You didn't recognize her as much because
She had hair.
Yeah.
Oh,
Was it a soap?
It was a soap. Yeah,
was a
that's
soap,
it. Because she
yeah.
was the. Yeah. So she's good, played a good guy. I don't think she is, but good actress in that.
Mhm.
Good for that type of role.
Yeah.
Well cast, I thought. Sorry. Go ahead. What else? Anything else in mind for favorite parts, best parts of that movie?
I liked the Underdark.
Yeah. So the Underdark is one of those things where, like, even if like you guys know exactly what the Underdark is and why it exists and what's in there, but even like if you didn't know what the Underdark was, you know that they went into a deep dark place and it didn't really matter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was like one of those things where like it was fun no matter what level you were. What'd you like about it?
I just thought it looked really nice, the backgrounds and everything.
Is that what the Underdark would look like?
Probably.
What is the Underdark? Why does it exist?
So the Underdark's just the underlying network of cave systems and stuff that's inhabited by races like the Dark Elves or the Drow, which are elves that kind of got corrupted by the Wall, the Demon Queen of Spiders, and they were driven out by the other elves. They live down in the Underdark, and you have like the Duergar, which are the Dark Dwarves, and you have the Mind Flayers. They're a problem. And then various other like underground races.
Well, those little brain things that they're walking by look like little pigs.
Intellect devourers.
Intellect devourers. So those things are creations of the mind flayers, and they're often, domesticated by the mind flayers. So that way, the mind flayer, because they can attack your intelligence and kind of subdue you just with psionic powers, and the mind flayers will then capture you and usually eat your brain. But so I think that was definitely an interesting thing. And I did like the little joke where
The joke
it's like
where
they attack you if you have high intelligence, and they do, and
But then
they just
nobody-
like
they just
they
walk
didn't
right
attack
past
them.
everybody.
Yeah, that's hurtful.
That's a little hurtful. That was a problem. And also, what I liked was how like throughout the movie, their actions didn't like break the continuity of the universe. So like you feel like if you could like wanted to play a campaign that followed like right after their same actions, then it's not necessarily different from what the world they were before. Not to say that their actions didn't have consequences, but like they like the red dragon Thembertrod that they fought, the big fat dragon, which was I thought that it was pretty funny, but there was the line from Zank that said looks like Thembertrod's found a new den, which kind of helps keep the continuity the same because in one of the campaign books that was released a few years ago called Out of the Abyss, you encounter Thembertrod in a Duergar city where he's helping the Duergar run the forges in exchange for lots of gold.
So he used to be there.
So he used to be there, and they because of that line, they said, "Oh yeah, he just moved," instead of just like having him be there, and then all of a sudden he's just over there. So I thought that was an interesting kind of kept the continuity there.
Favorite parts?
I want to say my favorite part was probably the end fight, just with everything going on and how the action was really well done. Like just how you had Sophina versus everybody, and how it was like this kind of like a big boss battle, which it was. But I like how everybody was giving it their all, and there was every single person. Like I really liked the kind of like the chaoticness of it, but also how everybody got like a chance to shine about it. Like every character had their moment to try to fight her.
It was almost like they were role playing. Each took their turn to do something, and then she would take a turn, and they would take a turn, and she would take a turn. Crazy. Just like Dungeons and Dragons.
And then my other favorite part is probably when they're asking the dead guys for
That was
information.
funny.
And it's just because Dungeons and Dragons very much is like that, and that's another thing I like about the movie is that they fail a lot. Like there's so many things that don't go right, and that's part of why the themes of this movie are the way they are. Is that failure is something that you're going to have to deal with, especially in Dungeons and Dragons. And it's about how you adapt from that, how you try to keep going. How even though you're failing, you're still playing the game, right?
I think there's a term for that in Dungeons and Dragons about how, as a dungeon master or as a player, whenever you fail, you can still adapt to changes. Or like when your players, if you're the DM, your players fail and it kind of throws off your campaign, you can still kind of turn that failure into a success that pushes them forward. And the term's called failing forward. I think it's an interesting kind of little like I guess skill you can pick up from playing Dungeons and Dragons is kind of just having something not work, but still having you be able to progress and
Having the drive to pick yourself up and keep.
come up with something new or a new approach.
Life lessons.
Life lessons.
Okay, here's what I wrote down. Some funny. I guess these were funny parts. I thought clever parts, at least. Olga goes to see her ex-husband, and it turns out to be a halfling played by Bradley Cooper.
Yeah.
You weren't expecting that, right? You weren't expecting a halfling. You weren't expecting Bradley Cooper. It just was funny, and at the end, she's like got her eye. But she has a thing for halflings, but which is also funny because you don't expect Olga the toughest person.
Yeah.
You had to fall for halflings, so she was. That was pretty funny. I'm sure that he'll make another appearance in the next movie, is my guess. Right? Because that was such a funny. Again, the paladin to me was the scene stealer. Like he played that part so well, and
So serious
Yeah.
to the point where it's like ridiculous.
well, he's gonna walk right over it. Like when he's walking, he goes right over the rock instead of around it. Like he saves the little cat at the beginning, and then he's like, thank you, to you, my friend. right? Where he's like gives him the coin. He's just like such a great guy. He's like, if you feel scared, you may take him, right? He just is like, anyway, it's great. He's such a like a funny part of that movie. Really good. And his fight scene is probably maybe my favorite part of it, right? Just such a cool scene when he's fighting all these people and divine smites. I like that part. What else did I write down? Oh, I love Simon the no confidence wizard when she's like, and he has, and he's like, yeah, that's probably fair, right? He literally doesn't have any confidence. Like he just is like, and that's his arc is like he finally gains some confidence, and it's just pretty funny. Like she's like, it's Simon. She's like, Simon who? And he's like, and then he's like, you know what I'm talking about? Like when he doesn't talk to her and she doesn't remember who he is. Anyway, pretty funny. But I just thought it was like a funny movie. Like it's entertaining no matter who you are. We expect another one.
I hope so. I think it's kind of up in the air right now.
There's like unlimited material they could draw from. I mean, there just is like they scratched just the surface.
They barely scratched the surface.
And they even set up stuff for a sequel too, right? Like there's the bad guy Sophina was working for, right?
Yeah, Zastam,
who's like a pretty big
the
deal.
leader of the Red Wizards.
The guy who's played by
Lord Neverember.
He's talking about
The
the
bad
guy
guy.
who plays him.
Hugh Grant, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
So he's alive at the end. He's in prison, but he's alive.
Mm.
Is his class? Would he be a rogue? Is that what he would be?
I'm not sure what his class would be actually, because you never actually see him in any fights or really use very many abilities. You know that he would have a charlatan background, which would imply that he has a high charisma score. So I'm not actually sure what his class would be, since you don't really see him get in any fights or use really any abilities.
Well,
Could be a rogue.
anyway, unlimited material that they could draw on. Oh, one other of my favorite parts was just how clever their use of the hither thither stick was, especially at the end when they're trying to break into the keep, and then they use like the portal under the carriage. They put it on the picture. That was like, I don't know how somebody thinks of that kind of stuff, but it was pretty smart, pretty clever, like how they did that, because I don't know, it's pretty cool. But entertaining all around, I thought. As my recommendation, I see whether you like Dungeons and Dragons or not. And the fact that you do like Dungeons and Dragons and like the movie is pretty telling. I think. Didn't get so artistically creative that it didn't. It's not, it happens sometimes in movies, right? Like somebody who's not, that's again my beef with like the sequel trilogy, right? They didn't have like Dave Filoni's and John Favreau's like writing those. They had people like directing that didn't maybe weren't as deep a big a fans as Star Wars is, so they were trying to do different stuff. But I don't think they did. I don't know who the director was or who they.
So it was I think his name was Francis Daly and Jonathan Goldstein, and they haven't done. I'm not sure what they've done. They've done like comedy films in the past.
Which they did a good job with the comedy in this one, balancing the comedy with like the action and stuff. I thought, but somebody knew enough about Dungeons and Dragons that they writing all the stuff into it that you guys appreciated and picked up on that the average person. So I don't know. 2 thumbs up.
Yeah.
Let's say thumbs up here in this room. So to all our viewers, if you haven't seen it, go out and see it. We look forward to talking about the next one. Any other parting comments for this movie?
No, I thought it was really well done through and through. No complaints here. Really appreciate that.
I'm excited to see where it takes us. There's a lot more content they could do.
I just need to see a beholder. That's all I want to see. Is
Sure, you only
I
ever
didn't
see
know
the
so much.
beholder in the credits.
There's a
Because like they reference a
picture
beholder,
of him.
and then there's a picture of the beholder.
I would like to see a fight
That's
against the
or
beholder.
that's like the thing with all the eyeballs coming up there. Right?
Yeah.
Just because they're like intelligent enough that they actively like do wrong things, right? Like they're not like a monster.
Yeah,
like,
they're smart.
there's a crime boss one, right? So
Xanathar.
You love Xanathar.
Which is another thing they could do. They could go down and like explore other cities. Like you have Neverwinter, which is kind of the main city they were exploring. But then there's also like along that same coastline, there's Waterdeep, there's Baldur's Gate, there's Icewind Dale, there's if you go down far enough, there's Port Nine Zaru. There's a lot of different places they could explore and visualize.
There's so much that like you could probably never make however many TV shows and still never fit it all in.
Yeah.
And so it's exciting to see it be the way it is, and I hope there's more. And I hope the Dungeons and Dragons TV show that Paramount was making gets picked up again because I do think there's an appetite for it.
Also, good, clean fun, right?
Absolutely.
You could take your family to this, and it would it was fine. It was good,
Yeah.
as opposed to like
Witcher,
or Game of Thrones or something like that. Which I know there's an appetite for that darker, heavier, more violent, or sexualized type stuff as well. But this is something like it's just kind of fun for the whole family, which is kind of great.
Yeah.
So, okay, anything else? Okay, thanks everybody.